who's concerned about property, about the market, about building right now? No one? I'm not coming as a scrooge in the marketplace. I've been working with Osmar for 12 or 14, maybe years now, a little while. We have a strong engagement with Osmar as we do a huge amount of due diligence on the people that we work with, and they're people that we trust. And so, you know, I'm here out of love. We love these guys for the work that they do, and we trust the work that they do. So there's no other affiliation other than this is from me a thank you to them. The second part of that is that I'm not here to talk to you about the property market as someone who has zero accountability. So people talk about banks. Who's worried about interest rates rising? Who's worried about the effect on the property market? So here's the thing. Everything that you see that's clickbait online about market falling and what's going to happen comes from the statements banks make. Do you know how many times the banks have been right in their predictions of the property market in longer than 12 months? Zero. 100% of the time they've been wrong. 100%. Yet we still listen, and the media still listens to them. And then there's you have people like Shane Oliver, who used to work at the RBA, who stands up and talks about the property market. Shane Oliver is the chief economist of the largest managed fund in the country. What interest does he have in the property market doing well, people focusing on property and investing in property? Zero. So I watched a presentation recently where to prove his point, he had to take property prices back to 1920 to say that the current property prices were 22% above trend. If you take out the Great Depression, it says that property prices are on trend. If you take out everything up to World War II, it says that property prices are currently below trend. So a lot of people have a lot of motivation for the things to say about property. Things I'm going to share with you tonight are about, I'm 100% accountable for the things that we talk about in property. And there's some of us here in our business that see the various machinations and the growth over the years. But when everyone was closing their wallets during COVID, we opened our wallets because we said this is going to be the best thing that's happened in property. And a perfect example is if Core Logic, the biggest data house in the country, stood up today, Eliza Owen, who's the chief economist, and said property prices are going to fall. And I said they're going to go the other way. Who's everyone going to listen to? Well, in May 2020, Eliza Owen, the chief economist of Core Logic, stood up and said the number one at-risk market, and this is so we can pull the articles and show you, the number one at-risk market because of COVID is the Sunshine Coast. We came out in the same week and said the number one performing market as a result of COVID is going to be the Sunshine Coast. So 2 years later, it was right. So,
You're definitely not happy.
So the part of things I'm going to say is because I need you to be open and not to panic at the start of what I say, because I'm going to open up some big thinking thoughts. So I just want you to be open and to listen to a couple of things I'm going to say. I'm going to take some very big picture stuff, because who's worried about the effects of the war in Ukraine and inflation? Yep, so I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the things that we try and articulate and filter that through. And then I'm going to put it in the context of what's likely to happen over the next 5 and 10 years, but importantly, what we can expect over the next couple of years in the property market here. Is that fair? So you're welcome to ask any questions. I've got 20 minutes left. So if I race over time or I get on track, that's on you guys. I'll just give you a fair warning. Is that fair? Good. Okay, I'm off. Let's go. So the first thing I want to talk about is how many people have worked through 2 recessions? Right, coming into you. Yeah, so there's a few of us here are probably old enough, not too many. And so those things, context, right? So if I was to say to you, so I've got a military intelligence background, so there's a few things why I view the world a little bit differently. How many people here have been in a combat environment? Good. So there's not too, thank you for your service. There's not too many people that understand what it feels like to be shot at, right? And the range of emotions and what years of military service do. So I can try and explain it to you, right? But it's really hard. And for each of you, there are things in your life that have created the filters that you use. And part of the problem in life is we take a filter and we apply it. So what I'm about to explain to you is not all filters work. And I'll give you a perfect example a little bit later on when I explain one of the reasons why we will never supply enough property to this market in our lifetime. Okay? And where that fault comes from. When I explain it to you, go, it's so simple and so stupid. And we're trying to do something about it because it's actually rests with the state government. There's laws everywhere on the way through, and I'll touch on those. But just bear with me on a few things. Because one of the biggest challenges we've got at the moment is everything that's happening around the globe, everything that's happened around COVID, everything that's happening in the Ukraine, we're trying to say, and economists do this all the time, in economics terms, it's the return to mean, or the return to trend. Well, we have had 30 years of a rules-based global hegemony, so basically a simple global order that has a set of rules, because we had a global policeman and the US is the largest economy in the world. So anything that you think of that looks like that going forward is over. I was in the army when the Berlin Wall came down. And you remember the Cold War era? So, so there was a bit of instability there. But in the lead up to the Cold War, there's a lot more instability. And that's what it's going to be more like. If you want to know the cause of World War II, look at World War I. So what Russia is doing in Ukraine is going to have a massive effect. And part of that is remember the part I said, don't get fearful, all right? Because there is good news coming in this. I just need to paint a picture first. So you have two of the world's largest exporters, so 12% of grain comes out of the Ukraine, all right? And both of those economies are wrecked. Russia's not going to stop there, by the way. Ukraine's in a world of hurt. There isn't a simple solution. The US had a chance to fix that. NATO had a chance to fix that. They sat on their hands. So from a military intelligence background, this is just the given for Putin. So you just watch what he does over the next 10 and 15 years, and there's a whole range of other things that happen from that. So that's a geopolitical position. But what that means is that has a flow through into the global economy. And anything that is a normal view and a normal picture of what we saw in the past, that's not going to happen going forward. So when you think about, well, when things get back to normal, and the reason I say that is because one of the biggest questions you've got, so starting to bring it back, is about what are interest rates going to? So why are all the banks saying we need to raise interest rates? Because it's based on a model around this thing called inflation targeting. So inflation targeting is where the Reserve Bank says we're going to keep inflation between 2 and 3% because that's the right model for Australia. How long has inflation targeting been around? Anyone have an idea? So they did a trial in 1993 and it was formally adopted as a policy in 1996. We've only been reading the minutes of the Reserve Bank since 2007. So in this period of a rules-based global order, relative global stability in terms of all of history, this great little system they came up with, it doesn't apply. And the Reserve Bank knows that. But every economist who is an operating economist today has trained in it, has said of it. How long's modern economics theory been around, by the way? Like Kenzie, when did he write his economics theory? Anyone know? 1930s. Alright, so it didn't come into effect in the 1950s. So economics theory that everyone teaches and everything's based on has been around 70 years. Up until then, it was a philosophy around how we improve our standard of living. So there's all these things that people keep saying, this is the model and it must come back to this and it must fit this. So part of the reason why we've been correct in some of the things that we've forecast over the last decade, and when I say correct, we've got a decade long of 100% accuracy in this market and some really big calls, is because all the information is out there if you're ready to look for it. And part of the problem is, apart from a military background, you can't just go and take what you've used to fight the Iraqi National Guard in the desert and then fight, use that same model for fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan. People are going to die. Yet economics say, this is our model. We're in this environment and we're going to make it work. So it's about changing how we look at things. And whether you do or you don't, that's nothing on me. What I'm saying is we've changed how we do business and how we look at things by looking at the model and what are the potential things that are going to happen. So I would suggest to you, Mal's big calls, because he's renowned for making some big ones, is the world's about to change in an unprecedented way, nothing like we've seen in the last 30 years. And for some of us who are over 50, we've probably seen some other things, but we actually don't know where that's going. Okay? So what we've got to look at is all risk comes from a lack of knowledge. So we need to change how we approach things. And the first thing I'd say about that is when we're going forward in life and when we're making financial decisions, there are two things that are really important. 2 rules of business. Anyone know what the 2 rules of business are? Rule number 1, don't fool yourself. Rule number 2, the easiest person to fool. Because what happens with the lack of knowledge is we try and talk ourselves into actions because we know we must act to create an outcome. So we create a justification to overcome the fear that's associated with the lack of knowledge. Okay, so part of the things that we do in our testing when we're making big calls going forward is are we applying the first 2 rule test? So I'm about to talk to you about the market and the status today and where we see that going and bring it back to you. But what I say in that is part of the key differences and part of the reasons why we've been so accurate in forecasting is from a military model, we don't say here is a set of data, therefore it equals X. So we grade every source. So a bank, if they're talking about policy, they're an A-grade source. If they're talking about forecasting the property market 12 months out, they're an E-grade source. So it's about understanding what it is. And it's about the data. It's like medians. If you want to talk about medians, you are going to lose money. Because a median, it depends on the data house it's coming from, it's actually useless. We're about to hear how much the medians have dropped, because we're talking about now in the riser island is out there talking about the Sunshine Coast is almost about to hit $1 million, and we've said some stuff about that as an average. The point is, we're going to see the median drop dramatically. Why? Because the median's a middle number. And most of the properties have sold in this high part of the market. So here's the middle. So all these properties that are about to be the ones that are selling, because people are getting cautious, and this part of the market is always moving, now the median's going to be here. And so people are going to say, oh, the median's come back, prices have fallen. No, they haven't. In fact, prices are still going up. And so medians will be misleading to you and create fear. No different to the discussion around interest rates are going to undermine the market. So 3 things to keep in mind. One is anyone's had a loan for more than 5 years, they are so far ahead on their repayments because of how much they've been paying down that it's not really going to cause any stress. The second one is that anyone who's got a loan in the last few years has been assessed at a rate 2.5% to 3% higher than the current interest rate. So they've got a gap. The third one is money in Australia, if it's 5.5% or below, is actually cheap and has a driving effect in the property market. What's our standard variable now? Average variable 199. Yeah. So are interest rates likely to increase 2 to 4% in any short period of time? It's going to take years. And by then, if they're increasing, the economy is growing. Have we got inflationary pressures? Yes, we have. What's the number one thing that the Reserve Bank has said they're looking at now, despite all this other data? Interest rates. No, it's before they change interest rates. Wages. What they're saying is wages aren't really rising. Because the ABS stats are wrong. The 4.4% isn't right. I'm not going to get into that because I get sidetracked. But the point is, what they're saying is, unless wages are rising, we're going to undermine the market. How many banks and economists are listening to what the Reserve Bank is putting down? 0. Right? So we've got to take that fear out. The market isn't going to fall. So, and here's the thing: in all of the property market history, and we're talking about macro numbers, and I'm about to step out of macro after this point. What is the largest fall in property prices in Australia's history in a 1-year period? What's that? No. Anyone? No, they actually went up. So it's 8.2%. Here's the thing, property prices have never fallen. If you draw a line, so 5 years before a financial crisis and 5 years after a financial crisis, it's a hockey stick. Financial crises, wars, empower property prices because money runs to it, because it's a psychological asset, a whole range of other things. What stops property prices, what pulls a property market back is macroprudential regulation. So if you think in 2016, this is one of the things we came out with, and everyone's talking about everything that's happened because of COVID in the property market. We talked about it prior, and we said there is going to be a boom. In fact, there was a mortgage broker who works in our building who said, I came to one of your meetings in January 2019, and you said at the end of 2020, the start of 2021, the Sunshine Coast market was going to take off. And he said, it was almost to the day. If you had said then anything about COVID, I was going to start a cult and start worshipping you. because it was so accurate. And I said, yes, because it's not about COVID. COVID was fuel to the fire. But when they said only 30% of loans to investors, when they started pulling all these levers by APRA, what they did was they undersupplied the market. So when rates came down during COVID, the pent-up demand and all those people who couldn't buy before were released. It's not COVID. Now, there are some COVID effects and different things. What I'm saying is that was fuel to a fire. And so what happens is, if you're APRA, you've got one lever, and you're going, oh, there's some stuff happening. Oh, maybe we should do something else. You know, in the late 1980s, so we sailed a ship to Fiji of the Rambuka coup, and we were going to evacuate all of these Aussies out of Fiji. The problem is, for the next few years, we did a lot of training on services protected evacuation. So we were going to help get civilians out. And all we had were gas masks, CS gas, rifles and bayonets. We had one lever. People were going to die if we ever had to do it. So now we've got all these other equipment to do it. But if that's all you've got, things are going to go bad. And that's all APRA had, the one lever for. So?
What they called?
By macro-prudential, by putting in place things like deposit rates and how many investors you could lend to, that assessment for rate, those sorts. So what they did was undersupply the market. So these are all the things that we're looking at now. So all that does is kick the can down the road. So it might slow the market. But what I want to get into now is the Sunshine Coast property market and things you don't have to worry about. Because it doesn't actually matter what's going on around the globe. It doesn't matter what's happening on a macro scale, because this market is in a set of circumstances that have never been seen before in a city around Australia, New Zealand, and pretty much anywhere ever. So we've been talking about this building set of circumstances. And so when you look at, the first part is macro stats are actually useless. Tell me one time in history when the Sydney property market and the Brisbane property market have performed the same. They haven't. So there's no such thing as Australian property market. It gets a little bit more complex. Tell me how does Maroochydore perform the same as Nambour? Right? Doesn't. So what you just said to me is there's no such thing as a Sunshine Coast property market. Okay, so we can't quite get quickly, you can get down to that level. I'm not going to get down to that level tonight. But when you actually look at and understand that there are about 2,500 micro markets, and they aggregate the data to talk about these macro stats around the Australian property market. So talking that for a start is absolutely useless, because essentially 60% of that data is Sydney and Melbourne. So when you look at a market and when you look at its potential and what the future likely holds, you look at three things: the economy, the supply and demand factors and how they feed in. If you look at the Sunshine Coast economy, what is happening here is a set of circumstances that will change this city forever. So we can go into a lot of it, but that broadband cable, that subsea cable, people think, oh, it's just the internet. Every time one of those cables is connected to a country, GDP increases. It creates commerce and trade and does a whole range of things. Now that's landed here on at Maroochydore. They haven't yet sold anyone's connection to it. But today, if you've got the best connection here on the Sunshine Coast today, essentially you're going out via Sydney and the cable network, and if you were trying to download a 4K movie, it might take you a couple of minutes, right? So there are now 7K movies, which if you try to download over a current connection today, it might take you 2 to 3 hours, probably longer. You'll be able to download a 7K movie from LA in 0.8 of a second, right? So what this means for us, but it is huge. But here's the thing, when you start looking at, we'll have a faster connection to Asia than anywhere in the mainland US and anywhere else in Australia. And every business that needs data, which business doesn't need data in Australia? Right? Every business that data aligned, what are the biggest companies in the world own today? What does Google own? What does Facebook own? Okay. Right, so we're in what's called the fourth industrial revolution, starting in 2016. I suggest you look on our website and try to understand that. But we're at a time in history, COVID has proved that how important data is. And every time a cable gets connected to a country, it's important. Do you know how many regional cities in the world have their own data cable? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Just us. So tell me the example that you can compare this to. Telstra talk about moving 500 staff here because they need redundancy and latency. It is going to transform the city. Here's the next thing. Australia is more like an archipelago than an island. So the floods have proven these challenges of the landmass and moving. So think of trucks more like ships. So an air bridge in an archipelago is vitally important. The international airport isn't about tourism, it's about commerce, and it is going to explode our business. Next one is, who knows what turbine is? Anyone? Anyone seen an article?
Heard about it already.
Yeah. So turbine has just picked up, yeah. So my wife happens to be the project director. This is a story for another day. But turbine has just picked up $33 million in federal funding. It is a world first program. It means that if you own a strawberry farm on the Sunshine Coast, you can now compete internationally. So it is a food and beverage manufacturing packaging facility. So our micro brewers might be able to produce 80 bottles an hour to put into the market. At Turbine, they'll be able to produce 41,000. Not by that many, probably 4,100. It's a big number, but it's exponentially more. But the point is, think about what that means for them to be able to compete with big players, what that does for our food and agribusiness, and the diversification in our economy. And there are a whole range of things that are these fundamental pillars that are in and of themselves would change our economy. One or two of these things would make us number one in the country for where our economy is going. The combination of all of these things together at this time, when Turbine and that announcement, when manufacturing and the shift coming back to Australia is so important, and our agribusiness, because where those thoughts started, as I was thinking about this today, and I wrote, the first words I wrote, and I end up with, because, ease and access and some of these things, at which I came to say, God, and that rules, that global order and the rules around it have changed. Where I started with, from a military background, what's the number one threat in the world today that's going to drive military outcomes? Number one, food security. We have some of the greatest, we produce $75 million, the equivalent of food for 75 million people every day in Australia, and there's only 25 million or 26 million of us. So what we've got, our ability to pick up that latent demand and to export is massive. And the Sunshine Coast is the only place in the world with this type of facility. It's a nation-leading first that'll be built next year, and it's going to supercharge that part of our economy. More people come here than the Gold Coast from a tourism point of view. So there are so many things where our economy, and you go and buy a flat pack kitchen because you have made the wrong choice and haven't used Osmar. So you buy a flat pack kitchen for Bunnings. Where are they made? In all the Bunnings in all Australia. Yeah. Pork fences. The pork fence you buy in Bunnings for all Australia. Where's it made? Yeah. People don't understand our modification. See the military helicopters that fly over the coast all the time. You know why? Because of helimods based here on the Sunshine Coast. So there's so much diversity that is just in its infancy in foundational stages on the Sunshine Coast, and we already have more job creation, more investment per capita than anywhere else in the country. And we're just at the beginning. So what's that going to do for demand? Yeah, so more people are coming, okay, and more people will come. And so because they're not just coming for lifestyle, this isn't a COVID effect. This was happening pre-COVID, and now it's being blown out of proportion. And this is when, so without spending too much time on demand, because I'm 2 minutes over already, so let me just talk about we can understand, without me going into much more detail, how many people are going to come here. So what that then means is, what does supply look like? And we have undersupplied this market by about 8,500 homes since 2011. And so take this into account. So one of the things, this is our last year's property market update and supplement, where we'll be issuing our new one in about 2 to 3 weeks. So it's just all the pieces are coming together. It's going to be a thesis on the market, and there's going to be stuff in there that is going to rock state government. It's going to rock council. But it's also going to rock every single interest group on the Sunshine Coast. And I'm not talking about the likes of Beach Matters and Friends of Medina. I'm also talking about the Business Council, because both of them are doing things wrong that are undermining our community. And that's not I'm not trying to get into the politics of it, and I can qualify, and if anyone wants to talk to me later about those and those statements. But they're not the only ones. It's those of us who are saying nothing and doing nothing are as much at fault, just as is council. But here's where it starts. The state government has, because I'm going to explain a couple of the implications. The big one is, they talk about this number between 350,000 and 550,000, and here's the plan. But what they're planning for, because our modelling gets thrown in with all the regional Queensland, is if 49,000 come in the last 5 year period, they're planning for 46,000 in the next 5 years. And the 5 years after that, 40,000. The 5 years after that, 35,000. Does that make any logical sense to anyone? Stupid, right? Because what happens is, in 10 years' time, you might be sitting on the toilet and go to flush and you've got a problem. Because they haven't built enough infrastructure. Or your house gets robbed and there's no one to come because they haven't planned for enough cops. But the reason they do that is for a couple of really simplistic terms. One is, that's how regional cities grow. Are we a regional city? No, but that's what their modelling does. The second one is if a statistician looks at the growth of the Sunshine Coast, and the Sunshine Coast being aging, so if we're going to look forward, we're just going to keep pushing that line out. It makes no account for the massive number of millennials that are currently rocking up and will rock up on our doorsteps. And so we talk about things like mass transit and the pushback on mass transit, and I'm not going to get into the details, but here's the real simple thing. If we don't want mass transit, then in 10 or 15 years' time, someone's been calling an ambulance and it's not going to get to them. And they're going to die.
It's already happening.
Yeah. Because we can't get it through. And I live at Bedina. I'm up and down the Nicklin Way every day, watching those poor ambulances every day, trying to get through the traffic. And people say, well, I don't want tram lines. Well, tram lines are a stupid idea anyway. It's antiquated. You know, what we should have is tech on the road and driverless buses, because that's the technology today, and that's what we have and can do on the Sunshine Coast. That's not the issue. The issue is that people saying what they don't want. We need as a community to engage, because this is the trajectory to be one of the greatest cities in the world that we are on, that's going to actually be undermined. But don't be scared, because in all of that is opportunity. So let's come back to the next couple of years. The point is that we cannot build enough, there's not enough land to build enough houses. So we have to increase medium density, which means we need nodes of higher density. So basically, if you think about Aura, between now and 2041, we need another Aura land estate, and we need 3 of those vertically to meet the demand of the forecast, which is somewhere at a minimum of 30,000, but somewhere between 50 and 80,000 people to shore. So what does that mean is we need to complete 3,000 units a year. We can't do it. We just physically can't do it. So what should you do about it? You should build and buy everything you can right now. It is not going to get any cheaper. And rental yields are going to continue to rise, and prices are going to continue to rise, because essentially if we don't make change, we're going to create Manhattan. Anyone understand what that means? Manhattan is the most expensive place to live in New York, and anyone who works there has to come from somewhere else because they can't afford to buy in Manhattan.
That's new stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's happening here today. I love, so we go to Jellos all the time, and so we go to all the Jellos all the time, and the guys there, I can't tell you how many times we've been there, and they've been packed, and they couldn't feed and sit and feed so many more people, and one of their eating areas is closed for one reason: staff. Because they can't, because those people can't afford to live here, so they're living elsewhere. So I've got 6 kids. I'm dealing with this with my kids at the moment. You know, taking jobs. You know, my daughter just got offered 2 jobs in Noosa and a job at the airport. Guess which one she took? Yeah. Why? Why would we just drive to Noosa?
Fuel prices?
Yeah, that's right. But it's the fuel price, it's the travel. When she can make the same money working here. So you know, so what will happen is we'll have a diminishing lifestyle if we don't do something about it longer term. So my encouragement to you is to understand the challenge and to be a part of the solution. But right now, if you're considering, you know, you're here because you're considering whether you should be building or doing more. And the 2 things I can say about that is I would do everything you can and more. And the other part of that is where I started is part of the reason I'm here is just purely because the due diligence we've done, these are the most trusted builders that we work with for house and land on the Sunshine Coast. So, That was a lot.
That wasn't a very good question over there.
Oh, I was just going to add to what Mel said before that you mentioned there was 3,000 homes a year we need for the Sunshine
No,
Coast.
units, plus houses, plus 2,000 houses.
That's 2,000 houses. At the moment, I think we're building about 500 a year.
Yeah.
So the shortfall is immense.
Yeah. But we're also not building enough houses. So, real simple terms, we need completed 10 homes a day. When we're not doing this, but spread over a 12-month period, we're completing 6. We're undersupplying each year the market by 40%. So when you think about, what happens to interest rates and all these other things and what's going to happen globally, and will some areas decline? Yes, they will. But the Sunshine Coast has a profile that suggests at least 5, but potentially 10, maybe 15, maybe 20 years of growth.
The problem with growth like this is you get lots of cowboys in the market that, in 10 years' time, houses that they rush and they build are not going to be any good, so that's where Osmo and that would stand out.
Yeah, 100%.
With their product.
And look, that's part of what you need to do. It's part of the due diligence. It's not just about, okay, I'll just buy everything. There is a little bit more to that. Because again, it's about making sure that we get that value. Yeah, great point. Anything else?
Cool. Thank you, Mel.